We've heard across the day today about it being International Day of Happiness and ways to be and stay happy. But happiness to me seems to have more complexities around it than maybe we think it does. So why is there a constant chase for happiness? Dr. Rachel Hannam is the Clinical Director of North Brisbane Psychologists. Good evening.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Good. Look, and pretty happy, as it turns out, for International Happiness Day. But when someone asks us if we're happy, can it just be a yes or no question?
Look, I think we often are asked questions like, how are you? Or are you happy in your job or your relationship? And most of us don't, delve deep inside to get the complex and nuanced answer that we really, would be the truth. And people don't necessarily want to hear it. So we say yes or no. And it is a really tricky question to answer, isn't it? We can be happy some days and not other days in some realms of our lives, but not in other realms of our lives. So it's a bit more complicated than that.
Look, it can be a minute-by-minute proposition depending what's going on. At a footy game, right. I've been very happy, in the first quarter and then very unhappy in the second quarter, and on we go.
Right, that's a good example, yeah.
Why do we emphasise happiness? Is this a new cultural thing, or have human beings always thought about and desired happiness?
Well, I mean, there's different levels at which we can talk about this. On one level, happiness is, certain brain chemicals like dopamine, which is the reward. When your team scores a goal, you get a big hit of dopamine, or when you finish cleaning the kitchen, or when you see a friend who you really care about. And we've always had that as a species. But for the most part, our brains have evolved to be survival machines. Our ancient ancestors were scanning for threats and looking for, food and resources through most of the day. They made, culture, which, created meaning and joy and happiness. But that was not their primary goal. Now, we don't have to live in that survival mode, looking for food and looking out for predators all day anymore. But interestingly, people often are very happy when they will get a sense of meaning, which is probably a better focus, when they're helping others, when they're being altruistic, or when they're part of a community with a shared purpose that they're working towards, because that's how we've evolved.
Yeah. So, Rachel, this pursuit of happiness, is it worldwide?
Well, there's an interesting little story that I told your producer about. When Sigmund Freud, who was Austrian, first went to America, he commented that he was perplexed that Americans were so concerned about happiness. He said, in Europe, we're concerned about meaning, but in America, you're all chasing happiness. And just that little story and his shock at that suggests that, across different cultures, we may place a different importance on happiness. All of the existential philosophers and psychologists came out of Europe. They were looking for, what makes life meaningful. Yeah. But a lot of the therapies that have come out of North America, like cognitive behavior therapy, are about reducing symptoms and finding more happiness. We get the positive psychology movement from countries like the US. And so, I've even noticed differences between Europe and the US.
Could this pursuit of happiness be a trap? Could it actually be holding us back? And not that I think people should walk around being miserable, but this a constant idea that we should be in a state of happiness, is it unrealistic?
It is, and it sometimes makes things worse, because then we have an attitude of getting rid of uncomfortable or difficult feelings and avoiding things that might create fear, or avoiding things that might create, vulnerability, and then we don't get to, pursue our best life. Being human is a package deal. We can't be happy all of the time. Sometimes we be sad.
Oops, we seem to be losing Rachel. I know we've got you back. We missed about the last 10 seconds. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I was just saying, being human is a package deal. We can't be happy all of the time. Sometimes we may be scared or confused or sad, disappointed, or something else. And, we need to live by our values rather than by our feelings.
Right. So those feelings that may not be in that column, we'd put them in the positive column, they're just as valid and need to be just as accepted as the happy feelings that we have.
Absolutely, because those more difficult feelings can give us really important information. perhaps that our boundaries have been crossed when we feel angry, or that we love something that we've lost when we feel sad, or that we need understanding when we feel confused, and so on. These emotions are like data if we know how to decode them. And we need that to navigate life and to live a meaningful life. So I'd prefer to put the focus on meaning and values.
Rachel, you kind of touched on this at the start of our conversation. The Australians are generally stereotyped as, cheery, happy-go-lucky people. But is that the truth, or do we just not want to, burden other people with the fact that we might not be having a good day?
Yeah, I mean, Australia has, in the Western world, it's up there with other countries in terms of mental health struggles and suicide rates. That might be the stereotype that we're happy-go-lucky, but, we're not up there in the highest sort of happiness index. It's often some of the developing countries where people score higher on the happiness index. There's plenty of suffering. We've seen an increase in our business size over the years, especially since COVID. People are reaching out more for help, which is wonderful. But I also think there's, a lot of struggle. Life is difficult. The pace of change is fast. There's lots of uncertainty. And if you think that you should be happy through all of it, then we get into that toxic positivity, which denies all of the other feelings that are part of life.
Yeah. And it can make it worse. If you're feeling bad, it's like, well, there are people who have it worse. I kind of hate that saying, to be honest, because it devalues how you feel. Or that's a first world problem, another one of my pet peeves, because I live in the first world. So it's very difficult to have a third world problem in a first world country.
Right. And it's a way usually of minimising your feelings and invalidating them.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we hear perspective. Sometimes I say, at least I don't live on a rubbish dump in Mexico. But that's me kind of thinking, well, I'm grateful for my life in Australia, but that doesn't mean I don't suffer. And I need to look at those feelings that are painful as well, because there's things to be learned from them.
Absolutely. Dr. Rachel Hannam, it's been great having a chat with you tonight. I think it's good to get a bit of perspective on happiness. Sure, be happy, enjoy it, but sometimes you're not going to be, and that's okay too.
Exactly. Thank you, Kelly.
Dr. Rachel Hannam, Clinical Director of North Brisbane Psychologists.